Hey guys, what's up? It's Pete Thorn. So this is video number 1 in my questions and answers series. I asked you all to ask me some questions on Facebook and on my Facebook page, and I'm going to try and answer every single one of them. So let's get started. I think I'm going to do about 10 or 15 per video. And so the first question that I received was from David Keir, and David asked me about songwriting. Well, that's such a broad topic. It's a really difficult one to answer. And sort of deserves a whole video or maybe video series of its own. But basically with songwriting, you know, I really pick up the guitar and just kind of see what happens. And I know that sounds simplistic or something, but it's really true. I pick up the guitar, and if I'm not inspired, a lot of times what I'll do to help is I'll put on a drum groove or a drum beat of some sort and just see what comes out as I'm playing to that drum groove. Because I find that what happens a lot is that as players we can get stuck in ruts of certain familiar rhythmic patterns and certain types of, you know, guitar riffs or guitar strumming or guitar finger picking, certain rhythmic patterns, and maybe even certain tempos we can get stuck in. So sometimes it's really cool to just wildly throw yourself a curveball and mix it up by putting on a drum groove that is in 6/8 and is, you know, faster or slower or something than maybe what you've been used to or accustomed to writing songs in, or if that makes sense. So so that can be really helpful. Also, streamlining your workflow as far as songwriting goes is really helpful. I like it if you know, I've got a setup where I can plug in, get a good tone, maybe get some effects happening or something like that to help be creative and inspire me, and I can track things really quickly. So you know, you don't want to have a situation where you come up with an idea and then you're like, oh, I got to plug in an amp and mic it, and it's difficult to get some drums going and stuff. By then you've sort of lost the inspiration. So it's really important to streamline your workflow, and I find that the recorder on my iPhone is super handy. You know, I can be anywhere, just sitting on the couch or something, I'll come up with a little riff or a songwriting idea, and I just click that thing on and throw it down, save it with a name that sort of references you know, whatever the piece is, and makes it easy for me to come back and reference later and go, oh yeah, that idea was cool. So I've got tons of those things stored on my phone. So hopefully that's some good ideas there for you, David, for some songwriting inspiration and whatnot. So okay, Chris Zazarine says, what's the best modeling software for players on a budget who can't afford an Axe effects? Well, that's you know, really open to interpretation. I think you got to try everything that's out there and see what works for you. And the great thing about software is many times there's demo versions available, so you can download it and see if you like it, and if you do, then you can purchase it. Ones I've had great success with are all the UA stuff. I think they're doing great things with modeling, kind of you know, within the computer, within the box. But of course, with UA, you need to get their interface and whatnot, which works great, and I love it. So there's a little bit of an initial investment involved getting the interface, and then you can check out the plugins and whatnot. But they do sound fantastic, and they're just great overall. So some other software that I've tried that I really like, I believe it's called Scuffum, S-Amp or something like that. I tried that a few years ago, and it's really inexpensive, and I thought it sounded really terrific, so that's a good one. Because I have an Axe Effects and I have a Kemper, and now I've got an amplifier and whatnot from Atomic, and also the UA stuff, I haven't really explored any other options. There's only so much time and to try all this different gear and plugins and whatnot. But yeah, I would check out the UA stuff as well as the Scuffum amps. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I could be pronouncing that wrong. I thought it sounded really good. Jack Franklin says, why haven't you been invited to do a G3 tour? I think, you know, truth be told, to be honest, I'm just not as established as the guys that do the G3 tours. I don't have enough solo material under my belt and that kind of thing. I need to put out another album, and I need to get myself more established as a solo artist. And maybe at some point I would get invited to do something like that. It would be an honor. The players that do those tours are heroes of mine, and it would be, yeah, a real honor to stand on stage with those guys. And I love with the G3 thing that you know, the guitar community is a great big community, but it's still kind of a niche community. you know, people that are into instrumental rock guitar music and that sort of thing. And I love that it's a community that's very passionate. It's not unlike Grateful Dead fans or Rush fans or, you know, certain bands with cult followings. The G3 thing is kind of like that. I think it's a community of people that are really passionate about a certain thing, and they stick together and they go out and they support it by going to see those tours and buying the DVDs and things like that, and checking out the concerts. So I love that about the guitar community. It's a niche, but it's you know, the people that are into it are really passionate. So I hope to do it someday. All right, I'm getting too long-winded here. Let's see. Let's speed it up. Todd Magnuson says, "No questions. Happy to see someone share the wealth." That's so nice. Thank you, Tom. How to properly dial in an amp? That's a question from Frank Wolf. So Frank, generally what I do is I start with the tone controls all on 5, and I'll you know, put the master down low if it's got a master volume, set the gain maybe low 3, 4, 5, something like that, and then raise the master slowly, and just listen to that basic tone that's coming out of the amp. If there is no master volume, you just bring the gain up slow, and it's going to be, you know, loud as hell, but you just deal with that. And so beyond that, essentially, then maybe what I might do is start sweeping the tone controls, you know, from 0 all the way to 10, the bass control, the mid control, the treble control. Listen to what they do, listen to how the amp reacts. Certain amps sound great, for example, Marshall Plexis with the tone controls dimed because of the design of the tone circuit in those amps. Other ones, definitely not, like, you know, old Fenders or something don't sound good that way to me at all. So you just kind of have to experiment, really, but everything on 5 is a good place to start. You know, with the PT100 amp from Shure, we designed it so that everything sounds great on 5. And then you can kind of just subtly tweak from there, and, you know, a little bit of booster cut or whatever, and get a good tone. But with everything on 5, you're right in the zone. I think that's a good way to dial in, especially modern amps. Okay, so Victor Lee says, my mixes sound nice and balanced. Any tips for mixing and mastering something other than high-pass filtering or cutting low mids? It's a tough. I'm pretty disorganized with mixing, and you know, generally what I'll do is try and get a good bass and drum sound together first. So I'll start with that, I guess, when I think about it. Try and maybe just the drums to start. Make sure the drums sound really balanced and are kicking pretty good to me. You know, I use a lot of programmed drums, but I tend to mix them like a real kit. So I've got individual control over the kick and the snare, the overheads, maybe some room mics and things like that. And these are things that programs like the Stephen Slate drums, which I use a lot, they give you these options these days where you've got basically virtual a drum plug-in sort of instrument, but you can mix the individual kit pieces just like you would a real kit. I'll usually add some compression on the drum kit bus, and try and make the drums just sound really kicking and slamming and balanced. Then I'll blend in the bass and make sure that the bass isn't you know, conflicting with the kick drum in any way. I'll, you know, tend to you know, certain tricks you can do where you sort of accentuate the bass guitar in certain frequencies and accentuate the kick drum in certain frequencies and get them to be separated. You know, it's too complicated to discuss in this video, but yeah, I'll get you know, a really kicking bass and drum sound, and then I'll add in the guitars and, you know, decide how they should fit in the mix and kind of blend them in. You know, I do a lot of hard panning of things and things like that, especially with guitars, to try and get nice separation in the mix. Sometimes that's not what you want to do. It just depends. On a lot of sort of heavy music, and especially modern heavy music, they tend to hard pan guitars. But if you listen to a lot of, say, you know, some British music, you know, Oasis or Radiohead or bands like that, even though they've got distorted guitars going, a lot of times they can be panned more center, and that's really interesting to me. So it just depends on what you're going for in your track. But you mentioned something other than high-pass filtering, but hey, that's a big one, like really EQing things and taking lows out of things, low mids, to kind of clean up your mix is really, really important. So I know I've talked about that before, but you know, I generally I tend to use a shelf filter where I'll cut off everything below about 70 hertz on most of the guitars. in my mix, and then I'll tend to cut mids around the 250 to 400 range, depending on the song and the guitar tone that I'm going for, to just kind of leave room in the mix for other instruments like the drums and the bass and whatnot. I tend to use a bit of light compression across the mix bus. I use the Universal Audio SSL style G bus compressor a lot. I really like that. Works great for just gluing the whole mix together and getting everything sounding terrific. So that's it. Yeah. And you say, do plugins help? Definitely plugins help. I mean, I don't have a lot of outboard gear in my studio, and these days everybody's going towards, you know, in the box mixing anyway, it seems, and yeah, getting to know some good plugins and making good use of them is really important. Okay, let's move on. Anton Johnson says, do I have a go-to amp? A special one you'll never get rid of? Well, it's the PT100, of course, from Sir. So, yeah, I can pretty much do anything with the PT100, barring maybe like a true AC30 sound, because that's really difficult to get out of anything other than that sort of design amp. But I find that I can even get close to those tones with certain pedals through the PT100's clean channel. So more and more and more these days I'm using the clean channel with different overdrives and distortion pedals to kind of augment my amp's main distortion sound. The PT100 is a really, really terrific clean channel that you can hit with pedals and just get a super wide range of overdrive tones that way. It's the best clean channel in the business, I think. Then, you know, the channel 2 and 3 sounds, that's kind of like a modded Marshally type or British type flavor, and I use that a lot for my straight up go-to rock guitar tones. But yeah, there's a ton of other amps out there that I love, you know. The PT100 is just a great Swiss Army knife all around killer tool, and it's really hard to beat as far as, like, you know, if I'm going to go out and gig and do a tour or go to a session or something, it's like, well, I should bring that one because, you know, first of all, it's the amp with my name on it, but second of all, it does a great job across the board at a million different things. So it's really tough to beat, I think, in today's market. I know that just sounds like I'm trying to sell amps, but it's actually true. I mean, you know, the proof's in the pudding, and I use it for the last, I guess, since 2008 on every tour I've ever done since then. So, oh wait, I did one Melissa Etheridge tour where I didn't take it. I took the Sir SL68 and the Jim Kelly amp because I just wanted to do something a little different and go a little more vintage. But other than that, I've used the PT100 on every tour I've done since 2008. Okay, and let's see here. Anton Johnson also had one more question. How do you think the future looks like for session players? Is it going to be harder to make a living out of it? Yeah, I would say so. Although there is a future in doing things really efficiently and being available to do these things, and not. So what I'm getting at is like the future for the traditional kind of session player, where, you know, you've got cartage and you bring your mountain of guitars and amps to Ocean Way Studios in Los Angeles or something, and there's a big budget, and you're eating catering every day, all day long, and that kind of thing. Yeah, those days are probably over and gone for the most part. But you see somebody like Tim Pierce, who's a pal of mine and just such an inspiration, just an amazing guitar player. He's got his home studio set up in an incredibly efficient way that allows people to either send him their project and he can track guitars there without them there, or a producer can come over to his studio, bring a hard drive, and he's got it set up just in an incredible fashion where he's got a desk that he sits at, and then the producer sits on the other side of the desk. They've each got a monitor and they can see the Pro Tools session open. The producer sits there and says, well, Tim, I want something like this. And Tim's sitting on the other side with all of his amps and guitars and you know, effects and things like that all set up at his disposal. He's got cabinets mic'd and ready to go, and he's just sitting there tracking guitar parts. What do you want? You want a Fender tone on this, divided by 13 on this, a Marshall thing on this, and bam, you walk out of the studio in 2 hours with a hard drive full of incredible guitar tracks. So those are the two, one is sort of the future and one is the past, and I would juxtapose those against one another and just say, well, if you really want a role model, it's really Tim and what he's doing. He's making things so easy and so efficient for people that want to produce music and get his guitar playing on some of their tracks. He's really, you know, a terrific role model. So yeah, check out Tim for sure on his YouTube channel. Michael McDonald says, what makes a good quality cabinet? What do you look for when buying cabinets? Well, there's a few factors at play. Speakers is huge, and construction of the cabinet. is huge. Also, the woods it's made out of. You know, I think traditional cabinets are kind of funny, like Marshall cabinets. They were such a happy accident, I think. The original Marshall cabinets, as I understand it, 412s were actually not 412s at all. They were 812s. Pete Townsend asked Jim Marshall to make him some speaker cabinets, right? And said, I want these 812 cabinets. So they built them, and the roadies said, we can't carry these things, they're too heavy. So they cut them in half. And you can see photos, there's photos I've seen of those original Pete Townshend Marshall cabinets where the top actually has there's no Tolex on the top because they bolted, you know, piece of wood down on the top where the cabinets were cut in half. And that's how the original 412 was born. There was about that much thought put into it. And now we go to all these great lengths to like replicate the exact Marshall cabinet, you know, design with the exact dimensions and all this stuff. And it was such a lo-fi happy accident, really. You know, I could see Jim Marshall. I just know. I mean, it must have been him calling up Celestion and being like, "Hey, send me over some speakers." No, not those ones, the cheaper ones. You know, I'm not saying that he was cheap or anything like that, but he was trying to design working tools for musicians, things that worked. And a lot of the stuff was being done on the fly at the time, and just kind of, well, let's try this. And then they were happy accidents, and we ended up thinking of these things as kind of the holy grail of rock guitar tone. So take it all with a grain of salt, I think. But you know, generally, you know, when I am looking for a good cabinet, it's all about the dimensions of the cabinet, the speakers that are used inside, and you got to kind of listen to it and see how they sound. And if it suits you, you know. I like all kinds of speaker cabinets. Generally I use closed back, but I like open back cabinets for clean sounds especially, or semi-dirty tones. And I like different kinds of speakers depending on the amp that I'm using. So, but cabinets and speakers can be kind of maddening, I find. You know, it's just an endless... speakers are filters. I said this in my latest Premier Guitar article, which is all about speakers actually, so it's kind of apropos. Speaker is a filter that puts a pretty hardcore, not anywhere close to a flat sound curve on your guitar tone. So every speaker is like an EQ, and you just have to, you know, listen to a ton of the different ones and listen to the characteristics and decide if that EQ is for you or not. Okay, and I think I'm going to make this the last question for this video. Elliot Goldstein says, what's a good 100 watt plus speaker for my ISO 412 cabinet? 100 watt speakers, yeah, it's kind of hard. There's not that many out there. There's the classic sort of EV design, which is, I believe, a 200 watt design. But other than that, Celestion makes a few different ones, I think, and I am actually a really big fan of the Scumbag speakers designs that Jim Siebel from Scumbag, he makes all of his speaker designs, I think, in a 100 watt version, and they sound really, really close to the lower power versions. So in other words, you can get a greenback style speaker from Jim, or a G12H30 style speaker from Jim, but in a 100 watt version. And you know, they might have just a little bit less treble and a little bit less top end than the sort of traditional designed lower power versions of those speakers, but they're really, really close in tone. So for you know, wide range of options, maybe look at the Scumbags that are available in 100 watt varieties. Okay, so it's Pete Thorn. Thanks for watching, and I'll do another one of these videos real soon and answer some more questions starting right from where I left off. Alright, thanks for watching. Please hit subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you guys real soon. Take it easy.